It started long before Buckingham Palace, before the royal titles, before the global headlines that turned her name into a brand. Before Prince Harry, there was Giuliano. But the world doesn't talk about him, do they? Because Meghan Markle made sure they wouldn't. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine this, a young Meghan, ambitious, charming, standing at the edge of Hollywood with fire in her eyes and a plan no one could quite see. A man stands beside her, her first husband, Giuliano, smiling, in love, unaware that his life is about to become the first casualty in Meghan's relentless climb toward fame. And here's the question that has haunted everyone who knew them. Why did Giuliano's family reject Meghan so fiercely? And what did they see in her that even Joe didn't? The story you're about to hear isn't a fairy tale. It's not the royal romance the media sold you. It's the prequel to a pattern, one that started years before Harry ever fell under her spell. Because before the royal rift, before Oprah, before the endless interviews about being silenced, there was another silence. A deeper one. The silence of the Giuliano family, who chose to stay quiet until now. This isn't gossip. It's a pattern that echoes through Meghan's past like a warning bell that no one wanted to hear. And when Giuliano finally spoke, when his family finally broke that silence, the truth they revealed painted a picture that's both fascinating and frightening. Let's rewind. Picture Meghan in her mid-20s, not yet Duchess Meghan, not even Suits star Meghan, just a young woman chasing dreams in Los Angeles. She's beautiful, articulate, magnetic. But behind that smile, a hunger, a craving not just to be loved, but to be seen. And when she met Giuliano, it must have felt like destiny. He was calm, grounded, stable, everything she wasn't. He came from a family that valued simplicity, privacy, tradition. They didn't chase cameras. They chased character. And that, perhaps, was Meghan's first problem. Because how do you shine in a family that doesn't worship attention? How do you become the center of gravity when everyone else seems content with normal life? You don't. You either adapt or you rebel. And Meghan? She chose the latter. The Giuliano family noticed it early. The way she always turned conversations back to herself, how her compliments came with subtle comparisons, how she never seemed satisfied with quiet moments. She wanted lights, applause, validation. She wanted to be seen. Joe, at first, was captivated. Who wouldn't be? Meghan had that rare ability to make you feel like the only person in the world, until she didn't need you anymore. Their love story began fast. Too fast. Within months, they were inseparable. Within a year, they were talking about marriage. But behind closed doors, cracks began to form. Joe's mother reportedly said once, "There's something about her eyes, they don't rest." It wasn't cruelty. It was concern. A mother's instinct that saw ambition where love should have been. And when Meghan started spending more time at casting calls than at home, Joe's parents began to see the truth. This wasn't a marriage built on connection, it was a launch pad. For Meghan, Joe wasn't the destination, he was a stepping stone. Still, Joe couldn't see it. He was in love, deeply, naively, sincerely. He believed in Meghan the way a man believes in a sunrise, blinding, all-consuming, certain it would last. But Meghan was already planning the next scene in her story. Let's pause here. Have you ever met someone who always seems to be acting? Who says the right things, smiles at the right moments, but there's something off? That was Meghan in those early days. Charming, magnetic, but almost too polished. The Giuliano family sensed it instantly. She wasn't connecting. She was performing. And no matter how much they tried to accept her, something about her energy felt transactional, as if every word had a purpose. The turning point came during one family dinner. Joe's father, a quiet, old-fashioned man, asked Meghan a simple question. "What do you want from life?" And her answer, according to someone who was there, made the room go still. She said, "I want the world to know my name. Not, I want to build a family. Not, I want to be happy. But, I want to be known." That one line told them everything they needed to know. Joe laughed it off. He thought she was joking, being playful. But his mother didn't. She saw something dangerous in that confession. Not because ambition is wrong, but because Meghan's ambition didn't include anyone else. From that moment on, things began to shift. The Giuliano family grew distant. Meghan noticed, of course, and she didn't like it. When people didn't adore her, She labeled them as jealous or threatened. She told Joe, "Your family doesn't understand me." And Joe, blinded by love, believed her. He began to pull away from his parents, defending Meghan, even as she quietly dismantled his connections one by one. Sound familiar? It should, because it's a story we've seen repeat itself years later on a royal scale. The same patterns, the same isolation, the same us against them narrative. But back then, Joe didn't see it. He thought he was fighting for love. He didn't realize he was becoming another chapter in Meghan's script, one she would eventually erase. The marriage didn't last long. Some say it ended quietly. Others claim there was a fight, that Joe discovered something that broke him. But what's clear is this: when it ended, Meghan moved on like it never happened. No bitterness, no reflection, just a new goal, a new man, a new version of herself. Joe, however, never forgot. Neither did his family. Because for them, it wasn't about heartbreak, it was about deception. They'd welcomed someone into their lives who was never really there. Someone whose love was conditional, whose loyalty had a deadline. Years later, when Meghan's name resurfaced in headlines as the future Duchess of Sussex, the Giuliano family was stunned. Not because she'd married a prince, but because the world was seeing the same act they'd seen years before. And they wondered, would Harry see through it in time? Joe reportedly stayed silent for years, out of respect. He never sought attention, never gave interviews. But when the royal drama exploded, when the world began to question who Meghan really was, Joe finally opened up to people close to him. And what he said echoed the warning his mother once whispered. She doesn't fall in love. She falls in opportunity. That line, quiet, devastating, captures everything. Because what if Meghan's story wasn't one of love lost, but of strategy perfected? The fame obsession wasn't born in the palace. It was forged long before, in a small home with the Giulianos, where Meghan first learned that family could be an obstacle, not an ally. And that's where this story begins. Not with crowns or castles, but with a young woman who saw love as a stage and marriage as a spotlight. A woman who knew how to turn pain into performance, rejection into reinvention. And a man who loved her enough to believe it all, until he couldn't. Because when Joe Giuliano's family finally spoke, when they revealed why they rejected Meghan, the truth wasn't just shocking, it was prophetic. They said she would destroy any man who tried to love her without giving her the fame she wanted. And looking at what happened years later, maybe they were right. But this was only the beginning. Because what Meghan did next, after walking away from Joe, after rewriting her past, would set the stage for her most dramatic transformation yet. The one that would take her from Hollywood's sidelines to the world's most powerful stage. And it all started with one thing she could never control. The truth that kept following her no matter how hard she tried to bury it. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. He existed before the fame, before the crowns, before the chaos. Joe Giuliano. The name Meghan Markle worked hard to bury. Few people outside a handful of insiders have ever heard it whispered aloud. Yet Joe wasn't some passing fling. He was the man who saw Meghan before the world did. The one who believed her laugh was real, her dreams pure, her heart sincere. Until he learned she had only ever been rehearsing. It's almost poetic. The man who loved her first ended up becoming her first secret. But how does a person get written out of another's life so completely? That's where Joe's story begins. Joe Giuliano was the kind of man who didn't crave attention. He was steady, soft-spoken, raised by a close-knit Italian-American family who believed in loyalty, Sunday dinners, and staying humble. He wasn't a prince. He wasn't famous. But he was the kind of man you marry if you want peace, not publicity. And maybe that's why Meghan noticed him. When they met, she was still on the outskirts of Hollywood, chasing bit parts, balancing auditions with side jobs, telling friends she was on the edge of something big. She told Joe she wanted to make the world a better place through acting, that she just needed one chance. He believed her. He always did. To Joe, Meghan was magnetic. The kind of woman who could turn an empty room into a stage just by walking into it. She had that sparkle, but it wasn't just beauty. It was presence. She spoke fast, smiled wide, dreamed bigger. And in the beginning, it was intoxicating. He used to tell his friends, "She's going to change my life." He was right, just not in the way he expected. Their relationship moved quickly, too quickly for Joe's parents. Within months, Meghan was part of the family dinners. charming everyone with stories about her auditions, her professors at Northwestern, her charity work. At first, it worked. She fit in, sort of. But even then, Joe's mother saw something flicker behind the charm, a restlessness, a need to dominate the room. When Joe's sister tried to talk about her own job, Meghan redirected the conversation. When his father told a joke, she laughed a moment too loud, then followed up with a story of her own that somehow made her the punchline. It wasn't malicious, not yet, but it was calculated. The Giuliano family had met plenty of confident women before. This was different. Confidence can coexist with grace. What they saw was control. Joe, though, was blinded. He thought Meghan's energy was just ambition. He thought she was misunderstood, a woman ahead of her time, too strong for small minds. When his mother tried to warn him, he dismissed her gently. "Mom, you just don't get her. She's got big dreams." His mother replied, "Dreams are fine, Joey, but make sure she sees you in them." He didn't understand what she meant, not then. By the second year, Meghan was fully in charge. She organized their social life, picked their friends, planned their photos. She wanted to document everything, the trips, the dinners, the romantic moments, as if curating a museum of her own life. She'd say things like, "It's not real until you can show it." And Joe, being the loyal man he was, didn't argue. He took the pictures. He smiled beside her. But somewhere deep down, he started to feel it, the strange sense that he was becoming a prop. Have you ever been loved by someone who needs you more as a mirror than as a partner? That's what Joe began to realize. He existed to reflect Meghan's light, never to share it. When they went to events, she'd introduce him as my rock, or my biggest supporter, never just my husband. It sounds small, but to Joe it mattered. It was like she was always performing, always auditioning, even in private moments. He once asked her, "Can't we just be us, without the world watching?" She smiled, kissed his cheek, and said, "The world's always watching, Joe. You just have to give them something worth seeing." That was the moment he realized she didn't want love. She wanted legacy. And yet, he stayed. Because that's what good men do. They stay, they forgive, they hope things will change. But love can't survive when one person's always writing the script and the other's just reading lines. Joe's family tried again to warn him. His father pulled him aside one evening and said, "Son, you're living in her movie. You just don't realize it yet." Joe laughed it off. But deep down, the line stuck with him. Because sometimes, late at night, he'd hear Meghan practicing lines from auditions, crying on cue, changing expressions in the mirror, and he couldn't tell if she was rehearsing or confessing. One evening changed everything. Joe's family hosted a small gathering. Cousins, neighbors, old friends. Everyone was chatting, eating, laughing. Then someone asked Meghan a harmless question. "What do you love most about Joe?" The room went quiet. She paused just a moment too long, then smiled that perfect, camera-ready smile and said, "He makes me look good." The crowd laughed politely. Joe smiled too, but inside, something cracked. Because it wasn't a joke. It was the truth, wrapped in humor. He made her look good, and that's why she kept him. That night, Joe couldn't sleep. He replayed every compliment, every kiss, every time she'd said "we," but meant me. And for the first time, he wondered if his family had been right all along. He started noticing things after that. The way she always checked her reflection before saying anything serious. The way she'd rehearse casual conversations before meeting certain people. The way her warmth switched off the moment cameras or important eyes weren't around. It was like watching someone morph in real time, half human, half illusion. And that illusion was growing stronger. Every decision Meghan made revolved around visibility. She'd volunteer for causes that offered press coverage. She'd post quotes about empowerment, then quietly belittle anyone who questioned her. She'd talk about humility, but demand admiration. Joe once tried to surprise her with a weekend getaway. No cameras, no schedule, no glamour. She refused. "There's no point in going somewhere if nobody knows you were there," she said. That sentence stayed with him like a splinter under the skin. Then came the moment that changed everything. The one his mother would later describe as the day we lost him. Meghan told Joe she wanted to move. Not to a quieter life. To Los Angeles. Closer to agents. Closer to the people who matter. Joe hesitated. Their life was simple, comfortable. He liked it that way. She didn't. "You can't build a brand in the suburbs," she said. That was the first time Joe heard the word brand used to describe a person. He asked her, half joking, "Are we talking about you or a company?" She didn't laugh. She looked him in the eye and said, "Both." And that's when he realized he'd married someone who was no longer building a life. She was building an empire. But what's an empire without sacrifice? In Meghan's mind, the answer was simple: anything or anyone that slowed her down. The end came quietly. There were no public fights, no dramatic breakups, just distance. One day she stopped calling him love and started calling him Joe. One day she stopped saying, "We'll make it," and started saying, "I'll make it." By the time she left, it was almost a relief. For both of them, Joe's family welcomed him back, wounded but wiser. His mother said softly, "Sometimes losing her is how you find yourself." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew she was right. Years later, when Meghan Markle became a household name, Joe stayed silent. He didn't sell his story. He didn't chase revenge. He watched from afar as the woman he once loved transformed into a global icon, and the patterns he'd lived through began to replay on the biggest stage in the world. Isolation, control, victimhood turned into visibility. It was déjà vu. Only this time, the stakes were royal. And as Joe once told a friend, "The world's finally seeing what I saw, but it's too late to warn them." Because what Joe didn't know was that his story, their story, would one day become the missing piece to understanding Meghan's rise and her downfall. The forgotten husband wasn't just a footnote in her life. He was the blueprint. And what happened next? The moment Joe's mother confronted Meghan, the words she spoke that would send a chill through everyone who heard them, would mark the beginning of the end. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Every story has a beginning, but some beginnings are built on illusion. Meghan Markle's story with Joe Giuliano didn't start with a fairy tale meeting under the stars or a serendipitous encounter at a coffee shop. It started with an introduction, orchestrated, timed, and, some say, carefully crafted by Meghan herself. Because Meghan didn't stumble into Joe's world. She walked into it, with purpose. It was Los Angeles in the mid-2000s, a city built on dreams and disguises. The air thick with ambition, every smile hiding an agenda. Meghan was still climbing. No suits, no royal connections, just auditions, rejection letters, and an unrelenting desire to escape mediocrity. And then came Joe. He wasn't famous, but he was respectable, stable, educated, kind. He came from a good family with deep ties in the business and legal community. People with quiet influence, the kind Meghan craved to impress. And according to those close to Joe, Meghan noticed him long before he noticed her. She asked about him at a mutual friend's dinner party, pretending casual interest. But when she found out who his family was, their reputation, their network, their quiet power, her tone changed. She suddenly lit up, one acquaintance recalled, like she'd just discovered a shortcut to something she'd been chasing. The night they met was unremarkable to everyone but Meghan. She wore a smile she'd practiced in the mirror 100 times, that perfect blend of charm and mystery. When Joe introduced himself, she laughed before answering, as if she already knew where this would lead. It was subtle, calculated. Every word was part of a performance she'd perfected. The humble dreamer, the hard worker, the girl next door chasing her destiny. She told him she was just an actress trying to make a difference. A line that sounded innocent, but behind it was a quiet manipulation, because Meghan knew Joe admired ambition cloaked in humility. And in that moment, she became exactly what he wanted. They clicked fast, too fast. Joe was drawn to her energy. She was drawn to his stability. He offered what she lacked. She offered what he desired. It was attraction wrapped in illusion. But here's the first twist, the lie that set the tone for everything that followed. Meghan didn't tell Joe the full truth about her past. She edited it, surgically. She left out the relationships that had ended badly. She glossed over the modeling gigs she didn't want associated with her serious actress image. She reinvented herself mid-sentence, even tweaking small details about her family to appear more polished, more fit for his world. She told Joe she came from a modest, close-knit home. But the reality, her complicated relationship with her father, her fractured connection with her half-siblings, was nowhere to be found. She erased the chaos and replaced it with calm. And Joe believed every word. Because why wouldn't he? She seemed genuine. She looked him in the eye when she spoke. She made him feel seen. That's Meghan's real power. Not beauty, not charm, believability. Their first months together were electric. Meghan played the part of the supportive girlfriend flawlessly. She laughed at his jokes, cooked his favorite meals, volunteered with him at charity events, and always asked about his day. But beneath the tenderness was strategy. Every gesture served a purpose. When Joe mentioned his family's traditional values, Meghan began quoting books about mindfulness and family unity. When he talked about stability, she echoed his words. That's what I want too, Joe. Something real. When he spoke of humility, she'd respond. That's exactly how I was raised. Every phrase mirrored him. Every emotion was a reflection. She was shaping herself into the perfect match, or at least, the version of one. But behind closed doors, a different side began to emerge. Meghan's mask would slip, not dramatically, but in moments too subtle to ignore. When Joe's friends stopped by unexpectedly, she'd freeze for a split second before smiling, as if recalibrating her performance. If a conversation drifted away from her, she'd redirect it with a charming anecdote about her journey. If someone challenged her opinion, she'd respond with a soft laugh and the kind of silence that makes you feel guilty for disagreeing. It wasn't confrontation, it was control. Quiet, graceful control. The first real argument came when Joe invited her to a family picnic. He wanted her to meet his extended relatives, a casual, backyard event filled with laughter, music, and kids running around. Meghan agreed. But when she arrived and saw the modest setup, paper plates, folding chairs, no cameras, no glamour, her smile faltered. She pulled Joe aside and whispered, "This isn't really my scene." He was confused. "What do you mean?" "It's just family." She smiled, that same perfectly rehearsed smile. "I just feel out of place." To Joe, it was a small thing. But to his parents, it spoke volumes. They saw a woman who didn't want connection unless it came with spotlight. They saw someone uncomfortable with normalcy. And that discomfort would only grow. Still, Joe was in deep. He defended her to anyone who questioned her intentions. "She's just misunderstood," he'd say. "She's got big dreams, that's all." He admired her determination, her confidence, her ability to dream beyond the ordinary. But that's the irony, isn't it? The very traits that draw you in at first are often the ones that destroy you later. Meghan's drive wasn't the problem. It was the emptiness beneath it, the sense that every victory was only fuel for the next climb. No matter what she achieved, it was never enough. Not enough applause. Not enough status. Not enough recognition. And Joe? He became the anchor holding her back. Here's where the lie deepened. Meghan began telling people in her acting circle that Joe was supportive but conservative, that he didn't understand Hollywood, that she was trying to balance love and destiny. In reality, Joe had done nothing but support her. He'd helped pay for her travel to auditions, encouraged her, believed in her. But in Meghan's mind, she needed to start rewriting the story, painting herself as the ambitious dreamer trapped by a love too small for her potential. That narrative would serve her well later. In every interview, every confession, every moment she positioned herself as the underdog. Because that's Meghan's genius. She knows how to make herself the victim of her own choices. One night, at a dinner with friends, Joe overheard Meghan exaggerating her accomplishments, claiming she had been offered a major role in a project that, as he knew, she'd only auditioned for. He didn't confront her right away. He waited until they got home. "Why'd you say that?" he asked quietly. She shrugged, pouring herself a glass of wine. "It's called manifesting," she said. "You speak it into existence." He frowned. "That's not manifesting. That's lying." Her eyes turned cold for the first time. "Maybe that's why you'll never make it big, Joe. You don't understand how the world works." And just like that, the illusion cracked. From that moment, something changed between them. Joe began seeing the difference between the woman he loved and the character she'd been playing. The more successful she became, small gigs, modeling shoots, red carpet appearances, the more distant she grew. She started attending events without him, dressing differently, speaking differently. The humble actress had turned into someone else entirely, someone obsessed with image, with status, with being seen. Even her social media began to shift. Posts about love and gratitude turned into perfectly curated moments. Coffee cups, yoga poses, designer outfits, inspirational quotes. Joe wasn't in any of them. When his sister asked why, Meghan smiled and said, "People don't need to see everything." But everyone could tell. She was erasing him one photo at a time. Still, Joe tried to save it. He loved her, or at least the version of her he'd met. He hoped that behind the ambition, there was still the girl who laughed with him in those first few weeks. But love can't compete with obsession. And Meghan's obsession wasn't Joe. It was fame. Pure, unrelenting, addictive fame. The final straw came months later, when Joe discovered the truth behind a secret Meghan had been keeping, one that would shatter what was left of his trust. He found messages on her phone, not romantic ones, but strategic ones. Texts between her and a producer she'd met, discussing networking opportunities, better circles, and how being tied down isn't good for the brand. When Joe confronted her, she didn't apologize. She didn't deny it either. She just looked at him and said, "You knew who I was when you met me." And for the first time, he realized she was right. He did know. He just didn't want to believe it. After that, everything fell apart. The love story that began with charm ended with calculation. The girl who'd seemed so genuine had been playing a role all along. Joe walked away, but Meghan didn't look back. She never does. Because for her, endings aren't heartbreak, they're rebranding opportunities. And the moment Joe was gone, she did exactly what she always does, reinvented herself for the next act. But there's one thing Meghan didn't count on. Joe's family never forgot. And years later, when the world crowned her duchess and the royal headlines exploded, they recognized the same pattern, the same smile, the same ambition, the same storm behind her eyes. They had seen it all before. Only this time, the stage was global. And the warning they'd once whispered in private, about a woman who uses love like a ladder, was finally about to prove true. Because what came next wasn't just another romance. It was the reinvention of Meghan Markle, and the beginning of the empire she'd been planning since the day she met Joe Giuliano. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It happened over dinner, a night that started with laughter and ended with silence. Joe Giuliano's family had seen enough to feel uneasy, but they couldn't quite put their finger on why. Meghan was polite, beautiful, charming. Yet, beneath the surface, something about her energy made everyone at the table feel watched. Not seen, watched. It was their third dinner together, the one that changed everything. Joe was nervous. He'd spent the whole day making sure things were perfect. Meghan wanted the evening to be elegant but simple, and Joe's mother had obliged. Homemade pasta, fresh bread, candles. Nothing fancy, everything sincere. But sincerity, as the Giulianos were about to learn, wasn't Meghan's comfort zone. She arrived in a fitted cream dress that shimmered under the dining room light. Not too glamorous, but not casual either. Every movement felt deliberate. Every smile curated. From the moment she walked in, the room's rhythm changed. Joe's mother, Maria, greeted her warmly. "Welcome, dear. I hope you're hungry." Meghan smiled that famous smile, the one that would one day charm millions. "Starving. You cook? That's amazing. I never have time to cook anymore. I'm always working." Maria's smile faltered just slightly. "Oh, you must be very busy." Meghan tilted her head. "You know how it is. Once your career starts taking off, you can't slow down." It wasn't arrogance exactly. It was something subtler. A need to impress, even when no one was competing. As the dinner began, Joe's father asked polite questions, the kind you ask when you're still trying to know someone. "So, Meghan, what kind of roles are you hoping to play?" She leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "I want to play someone powerful, someone the world listens to." Joe smiled proudly. His parents exchanged glances. Maria tried again. "That's wonderful, dear. But acting, that must be hard. So unpredictable." Meghan shrugged. "I like the challenge. I always get what I work for." The tone wasn't defiant. It was factual, like she was declaring gravity itself. And that was the moment Maria Giuliano began to worry. "Have you ever met someone whose confidence feels like armor?" That was Meghan. Every question bounced off her, polished and perfect. But every answer made her seem further away, less human, more image. Joe's sister, Isabella, tried to lighten the mood. So, Meghan, when did you and Joe realize you were in love? For the first time that evening, Meghan hesitated. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I think it was when I realized we wanted the same things. It was a good answer. Safe. Generic. But Maria heard what wasn't said. Most people, when talking about love, mention moments. Memories. Emotions. Meghan spoke like she was talking about a merger. Dinner continued, and for a while, everything seemed fine, until Maria noticed something odd. Whenever Joe spoke, Meghan would subtly redirect the conversation. If Joe mentioned his work, she'd pivot to a story about her acting. If he told a joke, she'd follow with one of her own, just a little sharper, a little funnier. It wasn't competitive, not overtly, but it was constant. By dessert, Maria understood. Meghan wasn't trying to join their world. She was trying to dominate it. After Meghan left that night, Joe's family sat in uneasy silence. His father broke it first. She's impressive, he said carefully. Maria looked at him. That's one word for it. Joe, beaming, didn't see the concern. You liked her, right? She's amazing. So driven. Maria put down her glass. Driven is good, Joe, but drive without direction is dangerous. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? His mother hesitated. Then she said quietly, she wants something. And I don't think it's you. Joe laughed it off, of course. He thought his mother was being overly protective. But Maria wasn't wrong. She'd seen it before. She grew up around people who wore ambition like perfume. Strong, intoxicating, but impossible to wash off. And Meghan had that same scent. It wasn't about love. It was about leverage. Weeks passed. The tension between Meghan and the Giulianos grew thicker, unspoken but undeniable. When Joe's sister got engaged, the family invited Meghan to the celebration. She came, late, glamorous, drawing every pair of eyes the moment she entered. It wasn't a party anymore. It was her stage. She spoke more than anyone else, complimented herself more than she congratulated others, and when people asked about her projects, her tone changed. I can't say too much, she'd whisper, but things are really happening for me. By the end of the evening, Joe's uncle muttered to Maria, that girl's in love with herself. Maria didn't argue. The breaking point came the next week. Joe's mother invited Meghan to coffee, just the two of them. She wanted to understand her son's future wife, to find common ground. Meghan accepted, showing up precisely on time, dressed like she was walking into an interview. At first, the talk was pleasant. Maria asked about her upbringing. Meghan painted a perfect picture. My parents are amazing. My childhood was full of love and learning. She spoke warmly, fluently, but Maria could tell the words were rehearsed. Then came the question that changed everything. Meghan, Maria said softly, I can see how ambitious you are. But tell me, what matters more to you? Success or happiness? Meghan smiled without hesitation. They're the same thing. It wasn't defiance. It was certainty. And that was when Maria realized her son was in trouble. Later that night, Maria told her husband what Meghan had said. He sighed. She's young. Maybe she'll grow out of it. Maria shook her head. No, she's not chasing success. She's chasing validation. When Joe came by the next day, she tried one more time to warn him. Joe, listen to me, she said, taking his hand. She's going to break your heart. Not because she's cruel, but because she doesn't know how to love anyone who isn't useful to her. Joe pulled away. That's not fair, Mom. I'm not trying to be fair, Maria replied. I'm trying to be honest. He left angry. But deep down, her words stuck. Over the following months, the Giuliano family began to distance themselves. They invited Meghan less, stopped sharing details about family plans. They tried to stay polite, but Meghan noticed. And when Meghan noticed, she acted. She began telling Joe, your family doesn't like me. They're jealous. They don't get us. She'd twist small slights into insults. A delayed text became a snub. A polite question became an attack. Little by little, she isolated Joe until his loyalty to her outweighed his trust in them. That's when the arguments began. Maria told him, we're losing you. He replied, you're making me choose. But it wasn't Maria making him choose. It was Meghan. Then came the night that would haunt the Giulianos for years. A family dinner. Tense, quiet, uncomfortable. Meghan was unusually withdrawn, her charm replaced by cool detachment. When Joe's father asked how her career was going, she answered bluntly, "I'm doing what I have to do to be seen. That's all that matters." The room froze. Joe tried to laugh it off. "She means being seen for her work, Dad." But Meghan didn't correct herself. She just smiled, knowingly. That was when Maria leaned forward, her voice calm but heavy. "Be careful, Meghan. The more you chase the spotlight, the less you see the people standing in it with you." For the first time, Meghan's mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed, her lips tightened, and for just 1 second, everyone saw it. The fire, the defiance, the hunger. Then she smiled again, soft and disarming. "I guess not everyone's meant to be ordinary." That was the last time Maria tried to intervene. Because some warnings can't be heard, they have to be lived. And Joe was about to live it the hard way. Years later, when Meghan married Prince Harry and the world was caught in royal fever, Maria Giuliano would watch the wedding on television with quiet disbelief. Her husband turned to her and said, "That's the same girl who sat at our table." Maria didn't look away from the screen. She whispered, "And he's about to learn what our son did." Because she'd seen it all before, the charm, the control, the performance. And she knew one thing for certain. Meghan didn't love crowns any more than she loved wedding rings. She loved what they represented: power, validation, and the illusion of being untouchable. Joe, years later, would admit something painful. "My mom told me who she was from the start. I just didn't want to believe it." But by then, it was too late. Because Meghan was already rewriting her story, one where Joe and his family no longer existed. Their warnings had come true, and their silence would soon be replaced by the sound of the world asking the same question they'd asked all those years ago. Who is the real Meghan Markle? But the Giulianos didn't know the half of it. Because the next chapter in this story wasn't about family tension, it was about something much darker. A secret wedding, a vanished record, and a truth Meghan never wanted anyone to uncover. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Whispers. That's how it started. A rumor here, a photograph there, and the quiet suggestion that Meghan Markle had once been a bride long before the world saw her walk down the aisle to marry a prince. But unlike her glossy royal wedding watched by billions, this one was buried, quietly, efficiently, and deliberately. The question that haunted those who knew Joe Giuliano was simple. Did they actually get married? Because some say they did, and others say it was a union she erased before the ink on the marriage certificate had even dried. By the time Meghan and Joe had reached the peak of their relationship, everything had begun to move at lightning speed. To the outside world, they looked perfect, young, ambitious, photogenic. But behind the scenes, the cracks that began at that dinner table with Joe's family were now fissures ready to split wide open. Joe wanted permanence. Meghan wanted progress. He talked about a future, buying a home, starting a family. She talked about stages and next levels. He was planning a life. She was building a brand. Still, somewhere in that tangled mess of love and strategy, talk of marriage emerged. Joe wanted to make it official. He thought a wedding would fix the distance, calm the noise, prove that their love was stronger than ambition. Meghan smiled and said yes. But deep down, she wasn't saying yes to Joe. She was saying yes to what it looked like. According to those close to Joe, there was a rush of excitement in the Giuliano household at first. His parents were hesitant, but hopeful. They believed marriage might anchor Meghan, ground her, make her see the beauty in simplicity. Maria Giuliano even began looking at wedding venues, quiet countryside places, intimate and warm. But Meghan had other ideas. She didn't want a small family affair. She wanted glamour, cameras, opulence, something timeless, she reportedly said. But timeless, in Meghan's language, meant attention-worthy. The first odd sign came when Meghan started talking about secrecy. She didn't want people in the industry knowing she was engaged. It could affect casting decisions, she told Joe. At first, he understood. He thought she wanted privacy. But what she really wanted was deniability. She began creating what one of Joe's friends would later call two lives, one with Joe, one without him. In one, she was the sweet, loyal partner planning a future. In the other, she was the rising actress, unencumbered and available for opportunity. The duality worked for her, until it didn't. Rumor has it that they had a small, private ceremony. No press, no guests from Meghan's side, only a few close to Joe. It wasn't a grand wedding, more of an intimate exchange of vows. But whether it was legal or symbolic remains a mystery. Joe believed it was real. He treated it as sacred. He told friends later, "That was my wife." But Meghan? She treated it like a rehearsal. Within weeks of that alleged ceremony, things began to unravel. She became distant again, this time colder, more dismissive. She started avoiding family gatherings altogether, blaming auditions and photo shoots. Her phone buzzed constantly, calls, emails, meetings. But Joe noticed something strange. Whenever he walked into the room, she'd flip her phone face down. One evening, he finally asked, "Are we okay?" Her answer was sharp. "You're too focused on us. I need you to focus on you." But that's what Meghan does. She redirects blame, reframes control, and walks away before anyone realizes she's gone. Here's where things get even murkier. After their breakup, Joe's friends began to notice that any trace of their marriage, or even their engagement, disappeared. Photos? Gone. Emails? Deleted. Mutual friends? Ghosted. It was as if Meghan had pressed a reset button on her entire life. When one friend mentioned Joe to her years later, she allegedly replied, "We were never married." But those who were there, who saw the rings, the vows, the quiet promise, they tell a different story. And here's the twist. Even Joe's family, who had always been cautious about Meghan, were taken aback by how completely she erased their son from her public narrative. Maria said once, she didn't just leave him. She deleted him. Why erase a man so thoroughly? Because in Meghan's world, the past isn't something you live with, it's something you edit. She'd learned early that reputation was currency, and to enter Hollywood's upper circles, a clean slate was invaluable. A failed marriage to a non-famous man didn't fit the image she wanted to project. So she rebranded herself. Single, independent, ambitious, no attachments, no baggage, just a rising star with a story she could control. But no matter how hard you try to bury the past, traces remain. There were whispers in Hollywood, agents, stylists, extras on sets, people who remembered the girl with the quiet husband. A woman who used to wear a simple gold ring and say things like, "He's my rock." And then one day, she stopped wearing it and stopped saying his name. When asked, she'd just smile and say, "It wasn't the right time for love." That's Meghan's gift, the ability to turn heartbreak into PR, to make her own choices sound like destiny. Meanwhile, Joe Giuliano was left behind, trying to make sense of what had happened. He wasn't angry, just disoriented. How could someone be so present one moment and gone the next? He told a friend, "I don't think I ever really knew her. I think I knew the version she wanted me to see." And that's when it clicked for him. And for everyone else who watched her life unfold in the years that followed. Meghan Markle didn't fall out of love with Joe Giuliano. She outgrew the chapter where he belonged. After their split, Meghan wasted no time reinventing herself. She changed her hair, her wardrobe, even her social circles. She began associating with people who could elevate her image: photographers, producers, publicists. She took control of her story and reshaped it in real time. Hollywood was her new family. The industry became her church. And fame, that was her faith. But the ghost of that erased marriage still lingered. In interviews years later, she would avoid direct questions about her past relationships, offering vague answers like, "I learned what I don't want." When pressed, she'd smile sweetly and deflect. "I think we all have growing pains." Never denial, never confirmation, just erasure. That pattern, the rewriting, the controlling, the denial, would later echo in her royal years, when the same questions of authenticity began to surface. The same contradictions, the same blurred line between truth and performance. Because if you can rewrite your first marriage, you can rewrite anything, even a royal narrative. For the Giulianos, it was painful to watch. Not because Meghan had become famous, but because they saw her using the same charm, the same control, the same methods that once fooled their son. Maria said to a friend, "She doesn't love people. She loves the reflection of herself in their eyes." And that reflection had now become global. The irony? Meghan's alleged secret marriage might have been the most honest part of her story, because it revealed her pattern before the rest of the world did. The constant reinvention, the selective memory, the ability to walk away without looking back. That's what Joe learned too late. Still, some insiders claim there's proof, documents, witnesses, a paper trail quietly buried. One rumor even suggests a private investigator tried to retrieve their marriage record years later, but found it inaccessible, sealed, or scrubbed. If true, that means one thing: Meghan didn't just leave Joe. She buried the evidence of him. And if that sounds extreme, remember, this is a woman who built an empire on control. The power to erase, to reframe, to narrate. And in that empire, Joe Giuliano was collateral damage. Years later, when journalists began digging into Meghan's past during her royal rise, they found scattered fragments of her pre-Hollywood life. High school friends, professors, early co-workers. But not a single verifiable trace of Joe. Almost as if someone had gone back and edited the script. And that's when the world began to ask, why was Meghan so desperate to rewrite her origin story? What was she hiding? Because if she could bury a husband, what else could she erase? Joe, for his part, never retaliated. He never gave interviews. He never sold his story. He moved on quietly, rebuilt his life, and left Meghan to her mythology. But silence has power. And when the palace later began investigating Meghan's background, that silence spoke louder than any words. Someone remembered Joe. Someone dug deeper. And what they found sent shockwaves through the royal corridors. Because buried beneath the glamour, the charities, and the royal headlines was a story of a woman who had been rewriting herself long before the crown. And the erasure of Joe Giuliano wasn't an isolated act. It was the first draft of the persona that would one day captivate, and then divide, the world. But the story doesn't end with an erased marriage. Because the next part of Meghan's journey would reveal something even darker. How that obsession with being seen began to consume her completely. And how Joe's family's warning, the one about her chasing the spotlight, would come true in ways no one could have imagined. Because what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Every obsession starts quietly. A spark, a whisper, a single thought that grows until it consumes everything else. For Meghan Markle, that obsession wasn't with love or even success. It was with visibility. To her, being talented wasn't enough. Being admired wasn't enough. She needed to be known. She needed the world to watch her, to say her name, to validate her existence with applause. And the first person to see that shift was Joe Giuliano. It began subtly. After their supposed marriage or engagement, depending on who you believe, Meghan started to change. The warmth in her laugh, the softness in her eyes, began to harden into calculation. She spent hours scrolling through casting boards, searching for open auditions, networking events, PR mixers. But it wasn't about the roles anymore. It was about the exposure. She'd tell Joe, "Even if I don't get the part, at least they'll remember me." At first, he admired that drive. He thought it was passion. But soon, he realized it was something else entirely, something insatiable. She didn't care what people remembered her for. She just wanted them to remember. Every mirror became her audience. She practiced expressions, angles, laughs. She even rehearsed her authentic moments. How to look vulnerable, relatable, human. Joe once walked in on her pretending to cry in front of her reflection. When he asked what she was doing, she smiled and said, "I'm learning how to look real on camera." It sent a chill down his spine. Because she wasn't talking about acting anymore. She was talking about life. Her routine changed. Morning yoga sessions became photo opportunities. Simple lunches turned into content moments. She began using phrases like "my personal brand," "public image," and "marketable energy." Joe tried to keep up, but he felt like he was living with a character, not a person. He once told a friend, "It's like she's filming a movie that never ends. And I'm just an extra who doesn't know the script." The fame obsession had started, and there was no turning back. She'd talk endlessly about famous people. Not out of admiration, out of curiosity. How do they stay relevant, she'd ask. What makes people keep talking about them? Joe would shrug. Talent, maybe. Hard work. She'd smile thinly. No. Strategy. That word stuck with him. Strategy. Because for Meghan, fame wasn't luck, it was architecture. Something to be designed, manipulated, and controlled. She began to study celebrities like textbooks. Oprah, Angelina Jolie, Princess Diana. She analyzed their interviews, their poses, even the cadence of their speech. She'd say things like, "See how they pause before answering? It makes them seem thoughtful." She wasn't chasing inspiration. She was reverse engineering influence. Joe found it fascinating at first, until he realized that every insight she studied became part of her personality. Every new influence replaced a piece of who she really was. The woman he'd met was disappearing, replaced by a mosaic of borrowed personas. And then came the parties. Hollywood is full of rooms where reputations are made, and Meghan was determined to be in all of them. She dragged Joe along to events he didn't belong in. Producers, influencers, agents, people who spoke in half smiles and empty promises. Joe hated it. He'd stand in the corner while Meghan floated through conversations like a butterfly on caffeine. Always networking, always seen. He once overheard her say to someone, "I'm just one big break away from being everywhere." That wasn't confidence. It was prophecy. The fame hunger began to change her moral compass. She started cutting off people who couldn't offer her anything. Old friends were quietly dropped. Even family members were phased out. Her world shrank, not in size, but in depth. It became a gallery of connections instead of relationships. Everyone was a stepping stone. Joe noticed. He once asked her, "Doesn't it ever get lonely, living like that?" She replied, "Only if you stop moving." The arguments began soon after. Joe would beg her to take a break, to focus on their relationship. She'd dismiss him, saying, "You just don't understand what it takes." He did understand. He just didn't agree. He wanted a wife. She wanted an audience. And slowly, fame replaced love as the center of her universe. Here's where irony enters the story. Meghan often spoke about authenticity. She'd post quotes about self-love, compassion, mindfulness. But Joe saw the truth behind those curated captions. He saw the long hours she'd spend crafting casual photos, the staged candid moments, the practiced vulnerability. It wasn't authenticity. It was performance art. He confronted her once, saying, "You talk about being real, but nothing you do is real anymore." She looked at him, unfazed, and said, "It's not about being real. It's about looking real." That was the moment Joe knew he was losing her, not to another man, but to the mirror. She began chasing validation in every form imaginable. Instagram likes, casting calls, compliments. If attention was a drug, she was hooked. And Joe became the rehab she didn't want to attend. She started using phrases like energy vampires, but in her world, everyone who didn't praise her was one. Even him. One night, she said it plainly. "You make me feel small, Joe. I need to be bigger than this." He replied softly, "Bigger than what?" She smiled. "Bigger than you think I can be." After that, things spiraled fast. Every conversation turned into a monologue about her future, her image, her destiny. She stopped asking about Joe's day. She stopped saying we. Her entire vocabulary shifted to I. And when people talk about Meghan's later years, the royal rise, the interviews, the drama, they often wonder where that mindset began. It began here, in a small apartment in Los Angeles, with Joe Giuliano watching the woman he loved fall in love with herself. Then came the infamous night Joe never forgot. They'd been invited to a film industry mixer, producers, actors, the usual Hollywood parade. Meghan insisted they go. Halfway through, a director approached her, complimenting her charm. Meghan lit up, laughing, touching his arm lightly, subtle, practiced, deliberate. Joe watched, uneasy, as she slipped into a persona he'd never seen before, flirtatious, powerful, magnetic. Later that night, when they got home, he confronted her. "You were different tonight," he said quietly. She smirked. "That's called adapting." He shook his head. "It's called pretending." She turned to him, eyes cold. Maybe pretending is the only way people pay attention. And that was it. That sentence summed up everything that came after. Pretending wasn't a phase for Meghan. It was survival. It was the mechanism that turned rejection into reinvention. And Joe finally understood she didn't just want fame. She needed it like oxygen, because without it, she didn't exist. Friends of Joe later said he looked haunted in those final months. He'd stopped trying to fix things. He'd started watching from a distance, even while sitting next to her. She was still there, physically, but her mind was already somewhere else. Red carpets, interviews, headlines that hadn't been written yet. The woman he married was gone. In her place stood a brand, polished, ambitious, unstoppable. When they finally split, it wasn't explosive. It was quiet, cold, inevitable. No tears, no begging, no goodbyes. Just an ending, clean, professional, efficient. The kind of ending only someone obsessed with control could engineer. Years later, Joe would reflect on it with painful clarity. She was already chasing fame when I met her, he said once. I just thought I could outrun it. But no one outruns obsession, especially not one that burns as hot as Meghan's. The fame addiction only grew stronger after she left him. Every move she made after Joe, every career decision, every friendship, every photo, was fueled by that same hunger. And when she finally found her way into the world of real power, first Hollywood, then royalty, she didn't just chase the spotlight. She became it. But here's the thing about obsession. It gives you everything you want, right before it destroys you. And for Meghan, that destruction would come slowly, wrapped in gold and glitter, hidden behind palace gates and flashing cameras. Because the fame she craved would one day become the fame she feared. And the same spotlight that made her would also expose her. But that part of the story was still to come. For now, Joe Giuliano was gone, erased like a draft she no longer needed. And Meghan Markle was ready for her next act. A bigger stage, a higher title, and a new audience to conquer. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming.